My name is Petina Gappah. I am a writer and a trade lawyer, international trade lawyer. I am very lucky to be able to do two things that I love at the same level of intensity. My Zimbabwe is greatly misunderstood. My Zimbabwe is full of hope. It's full of broken, sad people, but it's also full of happy, industrious, resilient people. My Zimbabwe is a Zimbabwe of stories, and those are the stories that I want to tell. I love the archives because the kind of stories I write are set in the past. And because I'm a writer of realist fiction, I want my stories to reflect accurate facts, for example, accurate events. My most recent novel, Out of Darkness, Shining Light, is the story of the African companions of David Livingstone and the journey that they made carrying his body for over 9 months from what is now northern Zambia to what is now the east coast of Tanzania. I wanted to flip the story, return the gaze, and tell the story from the perspective of the Africans and not the story of the white explorer, the missionary, David Livingstone. So I had to spend a lot of time in different archives around the world, and I found an incredible amount of treasure here in the National Archives. History is always told from the perspective of the great men, whether it's David Livingstone or Cecil John Rhodes or Robert Mugabe. I feel that my responsibility as a Zimbabwean writer is to tell the Zimbabwean story in a way that it hasn't fully been told before, and I plan to do that with every book that I write.
We're going to?
We're going to the Hive, Short Heath. Yeah. So I'm setting up an interim office because I can write at home, but I like the illusion of having a job to go to, especially when I'm writing. And right now I'm facing a self-imposed deadline. I need to finish a manuscript by the end of the year. I decided very early on that I wanted to be a writer, but I couldn't see how. It's only when I read Sisi Dangarembwa's book, Nervous Conditions, when I was already in law school, that I realized that a black Zimbabwean woman could write a novel in English because she was the first person to do it. So by the time I read her and started reading other, Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, and other black female authors, I was already in law school and loving my subject of law. So I thought to myself, I can always be a writer, but I still want to be a lawyer. At the time, I wanted to solve the Middle East crisis. When I was in fourth year, I fell in love with international trade law. It's not a great background. I have a conference call. It's a panel discussion for the International Bar Association. Oh, that's even worse. We're discussing the major trade disputes that have been going on in the world between the US and China. Okay. Hello.
How are you?
Hi, can you hear me?
Dr. Gappah.
In this conference call, I'm wearing my hat as an international trade lawyer.
Dr. Petina Gappah is also a prize-winning novelist and playwright, so she's a woman of many passions and accomplishments. So,
the theme of my conversation, my part of the conversation is that African saying, when the elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. This was meant to be the Doha development round, but only very few areas have been agreed on. And we are feeling this effect in the developing countries because the attention is all focused on the trade disputes. It's easy to be fooled into believing that everything is normal. People have their coffee mornings, sushi at the Queen of Hearts, that kind of thing. But once you cross a certain road, life just changes. this is Mbaremsika, which is the largest vegetable market in the country. It's also the place that is, for many people who come to the city from elsewhere, the first point of contact with the city. For me, it was many, many years ago. I think I was about 4 years old when I first came to Mbaremsika and the bus terminus from our rural village in Gutu to live in a township called Glenora. And from Glenora, we then moved to the suburbs after independence. Did I say I say my levels, Nas? Okay. Come apples in my golden delicious. $1. Children got 3 packets of my apples. When my first book came out, it was received fairly negatively by state media in Zimbabwe. I had a newspaper article in the Herald, and the headline was, "Today's Judas Iscariot, Petina Gappah." It created the impression that I was an anti-government and therefore anti-Zimbabwe writer. Once you read my work, you realize that I'm just talking about the ordinary, everyday life of Zimbabweans who are influenced by the acts and deeds and words of the so-called great men. So, for example, in my third book, Rotten Row, I deliberately did not mention the president's name once because I wanted to say he doesn't matter. It's the people I'm writing about, the vendors, the magistrates, the policemen. So I'm standing at the top end of Rotten Row, which is one of my favorite streets in Harare. It's a road that connects the city center to the famous township of Bare. And it's a street that is redolent with history, with memory. It's the street down which the pioneer column came and planted the flag of United Kingdom. We have the ZANU-PF headquarters. We have the magistrates' court. And it's actually for that reason that I wrote a book called Rotten Row, which looks at how important the street is and all the different institutions that are on it. So the history of the city is embedded in the streets. So the road we are on is actually George Silundika, but the pavement still says Gordon Avenue. This is what I find so fascinating because we're such a young country, only 40 years old. So we keep clashing into history everywhere we turn. Ese is Silver Series. What do you have in the Silver Series? Yes, Congo to Cape. Oh my gosh! Dear Kaenda Kukongo, he was the first person to enter Congo River. Oh, a child history. Oh, this is interesting. Love from Auntie Crisp. Auntie Crisp went to Rhodesia in 1910, one of the early settlers. Isn't that wonderful? I was 8 years or so at independence. And so I have very strong memories of Rhodesia, and I went to school first in Rhodesia in a segregated township school, and then we moved to the suburbs after independence.
It's 15.
Alois. I'm your long-standing customer, sure. All right, okay. My memory of an independent Zimbabwe as a child are largely happy ones. But of course, I recognize that not everybody has those memories because a lot of very dark things were happening in the country. Many of which we as children were simply not aware of. And it was really, that was the period where this authoritarian streak set in. But, when you're busy swimming in your, suburb swimming pool or, going to the library, reading Enid Blyton, you are not aware of all these developments. To my shame, it's something I realized only when I went to law school. And we were reading judgments about so-called dissidents who had been arrested in Matabeleland. And then you start to ask yourself, hang on, what was happening here? In November 2017, there was what is called in Zimbabwe a military-assisted transition from the Mugabe regime to what we hoped would be a new dispensation. And this was one of many times, not the first time, that the military has directly intervened in Zimbabwean politics. And in retrospect, we should all have been very worried at such a direct intervention. But after decades of Mugabe's rule, after 37 years, people had just had enough and were desperate to believe in change. On paper, it seemed like we were taking a new direction. For the first time in many years, we would have an election that was internationally observed. The circumstances were so extraordinary and really involved the whole nation. People marched on the streets. It was just such a moment of happiness. They promised re-engagement with formerly hostile nations, and that's what got me excited, because I am passionate about open trade and investment. I got the sense that maybe this wasn't what it seemed from early on. But you keep thinking, oh no, it will get better, it will get better, it will get better. But I think by about 1 August, when the soldiers shot people on the streets, that's when I realized that this might actually not go anywhere, because they're still very willing to use the coercive element of the state. We are 3 years into the post-Mugabe transition. There's a real sense of betrayal. It's so sad to feel and to experience, because we had a really wonderful opportunity to move our country in a different direction. And I'm very fearful that we have missed that chance. Oxtail, hanga, ne roadrunner.
No beans in mine.
It's a boarding school thing. You can't do beans anymore. After boarding school.
Boarding school made it worse. I'm Rangamberi. Well, I'm a journalist.
He is the best unpublished writer in Zimbabwe.
What does that even mean?
It's like Roger Federer before he won a Grand Slam. He was the best player not to win a Grand Slam. And that's you. You're the Roger Federer of Zimbabwean writing. Right?
Our website really focuses on the economy. So there's no way you can write about the economy without writing about the politics in Zimbabwe. Writing about politics means two things. Either you get arrested or you have to censor yourself. So There hasn't been any big change, or the change that we want to see as artists.
What that coup was just so extraordinary. We all imagined that there was a real shift in policy, in just the way government, treats people, because people were part of that transition. Those marches in the streets and so on, it was, we thought we were fellow stakeholders. We thought this was our thing, People have every reason to be angry, because no one wants to feel used. No one wants to feel that they were simply instrumental in a power retention game between factions. So we are going to do the first official table reading of my new play, which is called Black Sunlight. It's a play about the very controversial Zimbabwean writer Dambudzo Marechera. Dambudzo is just returned from exile, an exile of 8 years in England, and has come home to independent Zimbabwe. But unfortunately, it still very much looks like Rhodesia. Dambudzo has got a fake Oxford voice. Has anybody ever heard Dambudzo Marechera speaking? Yes. Oh, good God, good gosh,
Okay.
The Marechera contradiction. He doesn't fit in England, doesn't fit in Zimbabwe. He's a young man who wants to fight all forms of colonialism, but he kind of has this belief that his culture is somehow inferior.
Okay, and we go.
Black Sunlight, a play in 3 acts by Petina Gappah. Act 1, Scene 1. Salisbury International Airport, Zimbabwe.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is 5:30 a.m. Air Zimbabwe flight UM707 from London Gatwick has landed.
From upstage right stumbles a young man of about 30. For all his smart, debonair appearance, there's nonetheless something disheveled in his appearance. This is Dambudzo Marichere.
Wow. I don't believe it. I just don't believe it. Salisbury, I'm in Salisbury.
Passport and arrival form?
Do you know, the first thing I did when I got off the plane was to kiss the ground. It's just as uncomfortable as you would expect. Not so easy on the lips. But still, I want to do it again.
It is not permitted.
He takes out a sign that says, "It is not permitted to kiss the ground."
When he comes home, the very first thing that he encounters is, oh, this is not allowed, this is not allowed, this is not allowed, you're not allowed to smile, you're not allowed to be happy. So you're sort of like living in a cage of some sort, you know. And then fast forward to Zimbabwe 2020, it's almost like that limitations of sort of like freedoms, you know, freedom of expression, freedom of thought, freedom of movement, freedom of conscience, you know. Like you just, everything is just boxed, you know.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. So I am going to see Tendai Biti, who is a highly regarded Zimbabwean lawyer. He is also the vice president of Zimbabwe's main opposition party, the MDC. Love this. God, I love libraries. The first thing he did when he set up the office was to order the books. So it was first the books and then the furniture. Remember, I promised you this book.
Which one?
The Mind Blast, Ramarechera, the one where I did the introduction. So I want to sign it for you. Yeah. Yeah. Tendai and I have known each other since I was a law student because he was one of my tutors in contract law. He was very fierce, and we were all afraid that he was going to fail us. But we became very good friends.
I remember I was a big Marichere fan.
Yeah.
Blew me apart.
Why aren't you a writer?
I think I'm a lawyer, you know, that's what I do.
Yes.
And that's my first love, and I think God gave me a gift. Yeah. But I would love to write a work of fiction. I've got ideas. My main character will be a woman. And I've got this story in my head of this. You see, the liberation struggle is not
fully told.
Is not fully told. And I think one of the things that fascinates me was the woman in the liberation struggle. I think she fought several wars.
Yes.
The enemy was not just E.M. Smith. I think patriarchy.
It's triple oppression.
Sexual abuse.
It's triple oppression, so gender, class, race.
Yeah. And then when she got into independent Zimbabwe, she was an outsider.
Are you optimistic or are you pessimistic about the future?
I have to be optimistic. I have to be optimistic because there's no crisis that is permanent. My only worry is that we've normalized the abnormal. You know, so we don't panic anymore. When excesses take place, we don't panic anymore. I think that we are in a dark moment. People want deep change, and I am afraid to say that, in my opinion, if we continue with this closure, where people can't breathe, even people in the ruling party, even people in the state, I think we're going to have another implosion. And for me, what really makes me sad is that to stabilize this economy, to turn around this economy, it's so easy.
It's easy.
Yeah. Our biggest challenge is not the structural issues, which are empirical. It's not GDP growth rate, because we can turn this around. It's not reducing maternal mortality rates or infant mortality rates, because we can do it.
It's not human resources either, because we have them.
It's the culture now.
Yeah.
And we don't have that leadership which understands that we are on our own. The onus is on us to build our institutions, to rebuild our education, our social services, to rebuild our culture, our Ubuntu, our value system. That will take generations to fix.
The library is one of my favorite spaces in Harare because it's associated so closely with my childhood. I don't believe you can be a writer without being a reader. And my path to being both a lawyer and a writer, but especially a writer, started in this library. The books I read as a child were books that children in England would have read. And it was then that I started actually writing, when I was about 10 years old, 11 years old. My stories were all about ballet and horse riding and having a cherry orchard, because I had no conception of Zimbabweanness as an identity, or even Africanness. So I had to make a necessary transition, what I call my own personal decolonization, from being a story maker as a child to being a Zimbabwean writer as an adult. So I'm preparing lunch for a small family braai. And a braai is what in other parts of the world is known as a barbecue. And then I have some friends coming over as well, and also some of my theater colleagues.
I'm very well, how are you?
I tend to hang out with a lot of creative disruptors.
There you go, bro. Yeah, brother! Petina, which song is this? Petina. Yeah, you can join in. You should.
By the time I started to write my first book, An Elegy for Italy, I had a fairly good idea of the kind of stories I wanted to tell about the Zimbabwe I know, the Zimbabwe of humor, of laughter, of weddings where dramatic things happen, funerals where dramatic things happen, just people falling in love, having babies, against the background of this difficult political and economic situation. Patriotism is loving your country in a way that allows you to be truthful about it, and sometimes it means to be critical about it. I just want my country to do well. I want my country to prosper, and I want my government to do better, to honor the founding document of our nation, which is the Constitution of Zimbabwe. I want us to maintain our dignity on the world stage, but we're never going to get to that place until we sort ourselves out and until we take our responsibilities to our own people seriously. My Zimbabwe is the source of my inspiration. My Zimbabwe is books, my Zimbabwe is music, my Zimbabwe is art, my Zimbabwe is laughter, it's humor, it's enterprise, my Zimbabwe is resilience.